and today's lecture is number 8. And as you can see, the title of our lecture is a translation of poetry. I hope it's going to be interesting to you, but before that we need to know the learning outcomes of this seminar or this lecture. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to show some kind of understanding of the concept of poetry translation, and hopefully you should be able to translate different excerpts or pieces of poetry into English or from English into Arabic. Hopefully. It's not an easy job, but it is very demanding. Now, if we are going to talk about three points or 4 points. Number 1 is a bit of introduction about, the question of poetry translation. I mean, there is a lot of debate about the translation of poetry. Some people say, whether implicitly or explicitly, it is translatable. In other words, you cannot translate poetry, whether it is from English into Arabic or from Arabic into English. And an evidence of that is the poem of Omar ibn al-Khayyam. It's been translated into English, and people say it's been successfully translated. I haven't read it, but there is a lot of talk about this particular poem, and it's well known in the English literature. The other opposite view says that, look, poetry is really difficult to translate. It is even impossible. Why? Because of the following reasons. Number 1, they claim that translation of poetry should be really poetry in its own right. In other words, if you want to if you want to translate poetry, I mean, you need to, it is poetry by itself. You cannot just really claim that it is translation and it is poetry at the same time. It has to be poetry by itself. The poetry you have translated should be poetry in its own right. In other words, it shouldn't feel that it is it's been translated. And the other reason for this group of people who say that we cannot translate poetry, why? Because they think, or they believe that poetry is ambiguous, and it exhibits, or it shows some special relationship between form and meaning, so it is not that easy to carry out the translation as far as form and content, or form and meaning. These are these two views you need to be aware of. It is not. I mean, people of poetry translation believe that translating poetry is not really only translating. It is not like any genre. It is not like translating, for instance, a story or any other literary text. It has its own. You need to have your own critical abilities. You need to be able to have this special skill of writing. Not any writer or any translator can really translate poetry into poetry. So you have to have these characteristics which make you stand out as far as the style is concerned, as far as the depth you have in your mind about reading a certain text of poetry. So it depends on your abilities. But people say that, okay, if you can't really translate poetry into poetry, then you know you can do it. It can translate poetry into prose. So it depends on the abilities, the resourcefulness, the skills, and the expertise and the experience of the translator. So let's see. I mean, this is Scott. This person, he says that, look, you know, it's, if you want to translate a translation into prose, poetry in this case have their own resourcefulness and their own freedom. But again, if you want to translate poetry into prose, you know, this is an exception, really. We will see. Now look at this example, okay? We have a poem by T.S. Eliot, and it's been translated into Arabic by Al-Nuaimi, and you can see, let's read a couple of lines together and see whether he has achieved equivalence, whether he has achieved the communicative purpose that the poem in English has achieved on an English reader. Now, to be able to judge whether this translation is really good, you need to be really good at both languages. You need to be good at English, you need to have this appreciation of the word, you need to really be like a semi-native speaker to appreciate the T.S. Eliot's English poetry or English version. Now the Arabic one, I'm sure you can tell whether it is really a good, whether it's good Arabic or whether it is Arabic poetry or not. Now listen, the winter evening settles down with the smell of steaks in passageway, 6 o'clock. I don't want to read it all of it, but let's take the first two lines. The winter evening settles down with the smell of the steaks in passageway, 6 o'clock. حل مساء شتوي حاملا معه رائحة الشواء في الممرات. You know, people there in the UK have this barbecue tradition. Before the sunset, they make barbecues, especially at the weekends. And the smell of the steaks, I mean the meat, you know, steaks, you know, when you go to a restaurant and you say, I want a steak please, and medium cooked or very well cooked and so on. So T.S. Eliot here is giving you this image of the situation when the evening, after people have left for home, after they have done, after they have eaten their steaks and so on, and still the smell of these steaks is still in the corridors or the passageway of when people at about 6 o'clock. Now, this is the background of these two short lines. حل مساء شتوي. The winter evening settles down. It is more or less like literally translated. حاملا معه, with the smell of steaks, حاملا معه رائحة الشواء في الممرات. You know, I leave it to you. But this is an example of, you know, translating poetry into prose. Okay? Please read all of it. and try to compare, try to learn the meaning of the words in English and compare them with the Arabic translated versions, and analyze it in your own way, basing your analysis on your concept of creative translation. We have agreed that creative translation should be really new, should be imaginative, should be appropriate, and should be stylistically has this effect of the original text. This is just an example of how to translate poetry into prose. So the Arabic version is not poetry, simple. Now, but another way of dealing with this difficulty of translating poetry into poetry is moving away from the origin. Instead of producing a translation or a translated text in prose or in poetry, you really move away from it. And according to Hamburger, he sees that if you deviate, if you drift away from the original text, he thinks that you have been defeated. In other words, you have been unable to translate poetry into poetry. And this is an example, another example. You remember we have come across this couple of lines earlier on, and look at the translation. Now, when he smells the scent of the rose, he wants to see it. When he sees the face of the rose, he wants to pluck it. Now, the first two lines, if you translate the first two lines in Arabic, it's pure poetry, it's beautiful, but according to Hamburger, that it's deviation from the main text, and it is like we have been defeated. Why? Because we couldn't really translate it in a way that that shows better translation. For instance, A and B and C: عندما يشم رائحة الوردة يريد أن يراها، عندما يرى وجه الوردة يريد أن يقطفها. إن شمها استحلى رؤيتها، وإن رآها استحلى قطافها. عبيرها استهواه فطلب رؤياها، ولما رآها أرادها. Now these translations, they are equivalent in meaning, and probably they are equivalent in form, but the communicative effect, I don't think it is. Maybe it is like the English one, but if you want to go a step further and translate it in the way we have done here: إن شم ريح الورد في أغصانها فمناه في ألوانها وبهاها، وبدوت في ثوب الجمال فكنت بين الأصابع رباه ما أحلاها. Now, this is poetry. This is beautiful. This is Arabic. Whatever you call it, it is beautiful poetry. No doubt about that. But people might claim, "Oh, doctor, this has been you have been drifting away from the original text." But I for instance, I might agree with you. Probably it is a bit 10% far away, probably 10%, but 80% of the translation of these two lines achieve good communicative purpose, good the meaning and the equivalence and the effect and it makes you feel, look, the translator has succeeded in translating this poem into Arabic poetry. Why? Because you know, he's been creative. I mean, we don't want to be literal. We want to be creative. We want to be novel, new. We want to make you feel and say, wow, what a translation, you know. So this is it. Now we move to another point which is very important. It's called the scopus of poetic translation. Now this concept believes that the scopus means the aim, means the purpose. Very briefly, this concept of scopus, you know, it came by North, and he claims that the translation is supposed to carry over the source text function into the target text. It means the function of the Arabic text should be carried along with your translation in English. It means the English version should have the same function of the original text. And he claims as well that it is a kind of bilingual. It has to have the effect of, it is a bilingual a process. It is a bilingual translation. Not only, you know, you think in one language and then you forget about the other. The other writers argue that poetic texts demand direct translation. They must preserve the stylistic qualities of the original. Again, some people say that, look, it is not only you translate meanings, it is not only you achieve equivalence, you know, or you communicate the meaning to the other language, or to the other readers or speakers of other languages, but you need to be able to convey the style, the stylistic features of the poem. Can you do that? So the translation of poetry, according to them, must take into account the special nature and language of poetry and the type of reading it demands. So when you are translating poetry, you need to think poetry. You can't think science. You can't think mathematics. No. When you are translating poetry, you have to live in a poetic environment. You have to live in a poetic atmosphere. You need to really create this nice atmosphere, this nice environment, whether you want to imagine yourself you know, at the bank of a river, or in the vastness of the desert, and in your little tent, and with the cattle of sheep around you, then it is up to you. You know, what matters is to have your own world of imagination, your own world of creativity, and you need to free yourself into a world where you can come up with something new, appropriate, and which and something that would make people say, wow, what a translation. Now again, this is another example to see whether Al-Nu'aymi managed to achieve the equivalence in Arabic, the communicative purpose of the poem, in a style that reflects the style of the original poem. Now this is Ezra Pound. He's an American poet. He's well known, and listen and watch and see and look whether Al-Nu'aymi has managed to translate it successfully or not. Now the title of the poem, A Girl. The tree has entered my hands, the sap has ascended my arms, the tree has grown in my breast downward, the branches grow out of me like arms, tree, you are violet with wind above them. It's not easy to explain literally. You need to be really poetic, you need to be critical, you need to be analytical, you need to be imaginative, you need to be creative to understand first what Ezra Pound means by writing such a beautiful poem. And then you see, look at this translation of the of An-Nu'aymi saying, دخلت دخلت الشجرة يدي وسرى نسغها في ذراعي. نمت الشجرة في صدري نزولا إلى الأسفل، وتفرعت الأغصان من جسدي مثل الأزرع. شجرة أنت طحلب أنت أزهار بنفسج تلفحها الريح. Now, is this poetry? Is this modern poetry? I leave it to you to decide. But this is an example of, to show or to examine whether the translator has successfully managed to achieve equivalence in Arabic. Is the Arabic poem here, or allegedly poem, reflects or conveys the exact equivalent of the English one? Does it really transfer the purpose, the function? Does it really convey the communicative purpose of the English poem? Does it have the style of Ezra Pound? I leave it to you. I'm sure by now you should be able to judge, you should be able to assess and evaluate. I don't want to impose my opinion on you. No, I would like you to have your own views, your own opinion. Why? Because it is like a free course, a free what we say area of thinking. It's you who says, okay, I don't think this is poetry, Dr. Halimah, but about probably 70%, 80%, 60%, because of the vocabulary he uses, because of the form, because the meaning, because the words don't go together, because the similes, the metaphor don't sound right in our culture, blah blah blah, you know. So now how can we translate the translation and the nature of poetry? Again and again and again, you know, you need, when you are translating poetry, you need to understand the nature of the poem. You need to understand that you need to understand the spirit, the energy of the original text. When you are reading a poem in Arabic, I mean, I'm not that really, I don't know a lot of Arabic. I don't know, or I can't read out a lot of poems to you in Arabic, but I'm sure the majority of you really know a lot of Arabic poems, and just read these poems and feel the spirit, the energy, the power, and the emotions, the feelings, the effect, the emotive influence of such poetry or such poem into another person, let alone, you know, when you want to translate it from English, from Arabic into English. You know, we have here, we've mentioned a few features of poetry. I mean, the following are the main features of a poem, or poetry. Now, the poetry or a poetic style should be, its physical shape includes use of lines and spaces on a page. You know, the look of it tells you that this is poetry. You know, we have two parts of one section, two sections, and we have different lines, different order of the lines. Its use of inventive language, and in particular patterns of sound and structure. You know, poetry has its own language, its own use of sound, the sound of the words, the rhyme of the words, And number three, it's openness to different interpretation. People interpret poetry differently. I can read, for instance, I read the Al-Shafi'i poem differently from another person or from different people. Everyone reads something based on his or her experience, knowledge, attitudes, values, and all these elements, you know, help you to interpret and read a text. You need to be, you know, you need to read poetry not according to reality. You need to really be non-pragmatic. In other words, it's your own world, your own way of interpreting poetry. It's very important. They are very important, these points. Okay. And again, the poetry is full of metaphors and ambiguity, and especially in particular ambiguity in style, you know, allows different interpretation. When the poem is ambiguous, you know, it's not easy to, by the way, translate. Why? Because it has different interpretations. You know, you say to me, well, I translated it this way because of that way, because of that way, because of that meaning, and because I understood it this way, or I understand it or I understood it that way. So again, another dimension to the features and the characteristics or the nature of poetry is that you need to take into account the cultural aspect of the poem. Now, poetic translation vary from one culture to another, you know, so you need to be careful about the cultural dimensions of any poet. Poetry has its own culture in every language, in every society, in every culture, in every nation. It has its own cultural associations, cultural dimensions. Now, this is a little example about how to about the problems a translator would face when he translating or she is translating poetry. Now look at this poem or this line, how Wormhut translated it. This poem: كأن الأسود اللبي فيهم غراب حوله رخم وبوم. Now this line was said by Al-Mutanabbi to what's his name? It's said to Kafur al-Ikhshidi by Al-Mutanabbi. Now, how he translated it? He translated as if the Nubian blacks were crows, around them vultures and owls. Now, in addition to the grammatical mistakes, as you can see, instead of al-aswada, he translated it blacks, you know, as if the Nubian blacks were crow, and around them vultures and owls. As you probably know, that this line was like a kind, you know, he was the main objective of this line is satirical, is to really mock Kafur al-Ikhshidi. When Al-Mutanabbi said this line, he was really not praising him. He was really making fun of him. Why? Because he wouldn't say كأنه رخم وبوم. I mean, the owl is used in Arabic. It's generally used to refer to bad omen and bad luck in Arabic. In English, whereas in English culture it is not necessarily used to refer to bad omen, but rather as a symbol of wisdom and sometimes love, you know. So the translator here failed really to convey the cultural dimensions of the Arabic mentioned in the poem, and that's why the effect of the translated poem is not as good as the one in Arabic. So you need to really study it very well and see So in this case, here the last point is how to translate poetry. You need to really be able to dismantle the poem and rebuild it and translate it, first the draft, and then you keep it away, keep the original away, and try to come up with a new translation taking into account the main features of poetry in Arabic or the main features of poetry in English. And this is, for instance, there are several ways of translating poetry, but it would be fair to say that most poetry translation aim to create translation that works as poetry in the target language, as we can see in the following example. So really, if you want to translate poetry, do your best to come up with a poetry into poetry. This is the best. Then if you cannot do it, then another a lower level, which is prose. So this is an example of translating poetry into poetry. I have asked you here, translate the following poem into Arabic. Use your creative ability in your translation. This poem, it's Halimah wrote it, and I would like you to practice translating it into Arabic. Can you translate it into poetry? I'd like you to be free, be creative. Just translate it, look at it, write the draft, and then forget about the original and try to write it your own way in your own words. I'm sure there are so many poets and poetesses among you. So this is practical A, and then I would like you to translate this from Arabic into English. وأكل كسيرة في جنب بيتي أحب إلي من أكل الرغيف ولبس عباءة وتقر عيني أحب إلي من لبس الشفوف. How are you going to translate this into English and convey all these beautiful images and metaphors into English? This is another practical exercise for you. Please work on them and do them. So I hope that you have enjoyed this seminar today, and I would like you I wish you all the best, and see you next lecture inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.